It's already 11 o'clock, so welcome to the second focus session dedicated to the upcoming Digital Euro pilot. Thanks a lot for joining us, to those in the Teams meeting and those of you who are following the live stream. As you are all aware, earlier this month we opened a call for expression of interest for payment service providers to participate in the Digital Euro pilot that is due to start in the second half of 2027. The plan for today is to dive deeper into what this exercise will entail. My name is Georgina Garriga Sanchez, and I am the press officer responsible for the Digital Euro project. It is a pleasure to be moderating this event with Digital Euro project director Evelyn Whitlocks, accompanied by Sebastian Ziepen and Helen Jorgensen, both team leads in the Digital Euro market rollout division. Before we kick off, I want to encourage all of you following this session to please engage and share your questions and comments with us. The purpose of this event is to provide an open space to address any questions you may have. We want to be of help in supporting you prepare for the technical and operational aspects of the pilot exercise. In order to do that, feel free to submit your questions via the QR code that is displayed on the screen. We will start addressing pre-submitting questions and then follow the questions that we receive via live as the event moves on. If we don't have time to answer all the questions, don't worry, because we will make sure to include them in our pilot FAQ section that is already available on our website. So without further ado, let me officially kick off this session by passing the floor to Evelyn to give us a quick recap on the pilot and a view on what is to follow during today's session. Evelyn, good morning and over to you.
Thank you, Georgina. Let me echo also what Georgina already said. So we're very happy to see so many of you interested in the pilot. We are joined by a large number of representatives from payment service providers, but also technical service providers from all across Europe. So we're very happy that you are here. And indeed, this session is there to help you to further prepare for a potential application to join the pilot. I will spend 2 slides to briefly summarize the pilot and how it looks like. And then I will introduce the agenda, and then we will move more to the content of the agenda. So as we have shared with you earlier, we aim to have a pilot that aims to fine-tune the design, but also to validate the technical readiness, and then the technical readiness not only of the Eurosystem components, but the full environment that is there. So that includes, very importantly, the payment service providers that will be the distributors of the Digital Euro. It will also include the merchants and the consumers. Because this session is mainly there to support the application of the PSPs, the focus will be on the domain of the payment service providers that could be serviced by payment service providers, but also supported by technical service providers. So what will we test during the pilot is what we call a beta digital euro. So it's a digital means of payment without the legal tender status, and it's not the official digital euro that would be covered by the legislation once it's adopted. And it will be issued by the Eurosystem. Because of the setup of the pilot, we will be limited. It will be a first step towards a potential first issuance, and we want to test the first step in a controlled environment. So that means within the Eurosystem premises, with a limited number of PSPs and also a limited number of merchants as a first step of our testing and our readiness. We have selected 4 use cases to be validated, and you see them at the bottom of the slide. So we will have 2 types of person-to-person payments, one being online with an alias or a IDIN, and also the offline digital euro. And then we will have 2 online use cases. One is with NFC, which is a so-called soft POS solution, and then an e-and-m commerce transactions. So this setup allows us to really collect and apply the feedback continuously throughout the pilot, but also after that towards the first issuance to further optimize the digital euro. So if we go to the next slide, here is an overview that I hope is not surprising for you, but it's always good to share to make sure that we all have the same context. As said, the presentation today focuses on the layer that is provided by the distributing PSPs, who both, which is on one side the distributing the PSP towards the payees. The payers, sorry, which is in this case in the environment of the pilot, the Eurosystem staff, and then on the other side we have distributing acquiring PSPs that would service the merchants that will participate in the pilot. And we believe that both the PSPs, both types of PSPs could be supported by technical service providers, which could potentially also be the case, of course, for the merchants. But as said, the focus currently is on the payment service provider part. So in the middle, you see the Digital Euro Service platform that consists of 3 different layers. So this is the settlement layer, the Digital Euro app, and the SDKs that come with the app, and also the offline components that are needed to distribute and facilitate digital euro payments. Underneath, you see more enablers, which is the tokenization to make sure that the interaction between devices is secure, and also the alias component. And then we have, of course, other components like legal archive, transaction monitoring, these kind of things. But those are enablers for those 3 main layers. So with that, I hope that I've at least sketched the environment of the pilot and its participants and what we are going to test. And then let me go to the next slide, which is the agenda. So the next point on the agenda will be the Digital Euro timeline, but also an overview of the documentation that we have published to guide you a bit through on what was there. Then we will have a block on business architecture, pilot payment services, user journeys, and minimum UX. Both of those will be presented by Sebastian Siepen. And then there are 2, one on functional requirements, end-to-end flows, and then a separate one on onboarding and user testing. Those will be presented by Helen Jurgensen. And then we will close with the conclusion where you will see me back again. We have structured it in this way so that the Q&A after each block is really geared to what is presented in that block. So we will really focus in answering the questions that are in that block in order to make sure that we go through the content in a consistent manner. With that, I will hand back to Georgina, and I will see you back at the conclusion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Evelyn. And after this introduction, indeed, let's jump right into the first presentation. In the meantime, I invite you to keep sending your questions. Please refrain from using the chat and instead send them via the QR code that we showed on the screen, because as Evelyn said, after each presentation, we will have a short targeted Q&A section. And with that, Sebastian, over to you to tell us more on the timeline of the pilot.
Thanks a lot, Georgina, and good morning all. So as Evelyn said, this call today is all about facilitating the participation of PSPs to the pilot as ultimately one of the key stakeholders and facilitators for the Digital Euro pilot. And PSPs, per the presentation Evelyn just gave, can have 2 roles, right? They can either be acting as a distributing PSP, servicing consumers, or as an acquiring PSP, servicing merchants. Here, this call for expression of interest is that we published on the 5th of March is the first step for you to be getting acquainted with what we're looking for and provide your application to it. This call targets PSPs and provides you with a very broad set of information, not only directly linked to the call itself and its annexes, but also supporting documentation. We look now maybe a bit towards the annexes on the left side of the slide. And firstly, shortly, we have the pilot payment service there. As you've seen in the agenda, I will touch on this in a second. And more importantly, let's look a bit towards the questionnaire PSPs shall submit in order to participate. So that questionnaire, you can overarchingly say, is divided in 3 sections. Right, we have on the one hand questions you need to answer regarding eligibility requirements. So these are requirements where we check, are you fit for the pilot, right? This means you need to be a credit institution, an e-money institution, or payment institution. You need to have the technical and operational capabilities to participate and the willingness to do so. For example, it's important that you're willing to onboard the pilot merchants in case they're not a customer today. And the same accounts for onboarding possibly Eurosystem staff members in case they're not yet a customer. Then also we have questions that are linked to weighted evaluation criteria. So these are ultimately not a requirement to fulfill or like there is one right answer for this. However, it is there for us to achieve the objectives of the pilot, right? And here we look towards a given market presence. We want to pilot across all Euro area countries if possible, across NCBs. So for that, we need a wide range of PSPs in those markets. Also, your level of market penetration is interesting to us and see if you possibly have existing engagement with NCBs already. Also, and I think I want to make this point very clear, this pilot is about learning. We want to learn, see what we have developed so far together with the Rulebook Development Group, with the European Payment Boards, but also across the Eurosystem here. Does this work? And for that, PSPs participate need to be willing to give feedback, provide that feedback, and develop ultimately the digital euro further for a possible issuance. And lastly, this questionnaire covers also while questions were not directly linked to the evaluation as such, but that gives you some opportunity to provide additional information on the one hand on how you may want to work with technical service providers supporting you in your work on the pilot, also looking at how you may want to facilitate your front-end integration, and lastly gives you opportunity to provide any other information. One thing that's very important, because we have received the first applications already, some of them were not signed. So please make sure you sign them, because I understand I'm checking with the lawyers, but I think if you don't sign them, you're not eligible to participate. So please sign the application when submitting it. In addition to, let's say, the CEI and its annexes, we have published supporting documentation. These are the functional requirements, the business architecture, onboarding overview, and so forth. You have seen the agenda. We'll touch on them in a second. And furthermore, we published as well additional support for PSPs, and these are the FAQs. So of course, we tried to capture as much information as possible within those documents here that we have published, but there are more questions coming on. We have seen them in runner-up of the session here. We have seen them being submitted already via the dedicated form that you can use for this. And that is something we would encourage you. Submit your questions. We will then thereafter regularly publish FAQs to ensure you have as much information as possible to facilitate your application to the pilot. So one point that came up a lot in this context was, what does the timeline look like? I need to plan. So let's take a look a bit at the timeline. As said, on the 5th of March, we published and launched the call for expression of interest for PSPs alongside all the information I just introduced. We will, however, publish further information. In April, we will publish as well the PSP participation agreement, which is ultimately the contract between PSPs and national central banks participating to the pilot. And also we publish, for example, technical specifications and other documentation in that regard that will help you to further understand your abilities and capabilities to participate in the pilot and facilitate your application. At this date now, please mark it in your calendars, is the 14th of May. The 14th of May is the application deadline. You need to apply by that date. If you apply late, we cannot consider you, even though we would love to, right? So you need to be applying by that date. So better don't be like me and submit everything at the last moment, but maybe submit on the 13th or even earlier. As said, we have received some applications already. Then thereafter, we take away all of those applications, we review them together with the national central banks. We do first an eligibility check. So are you eligible to participate? If yes, you move to the weighted evaluation step. Here we assess then how best to calibrate this to ensure we meet the objectives of the pilot. Then we'll inform, sign contracts with the respective PSPs participating, and then the development phase starts. So this development phase will likely start in July. Here, well, the Eurosystem start on already there, but this is the build phase, right? So you, us, we build together. We will be in exchange very regularly, be it at technical level, be it at operational level. This will also comprise the testing and onboarding phase, to which Helen will speak in a minute. So this is all to prepare the operational phase of the pilot, which is to be starting in the second half of 27, and then we'll run the pilot across the use case that Evelyn outlined earlier on for approximately 1 year. And I think with that, I will pause here, and Georgina, back to you for any questions people may have.
Thanks a lot, Sebastian, for this useful overview. And indeed, we already have many questions on this point. Let me start with one on documentation and planning, which is, when can PSPs expect a final version of the documentation needed for their development efforts?
So I tried, probably this question then came in while I was speaking or early on, right? So I tried to allude to this now on the timeline slide a little bit already, right? So we are very much aware of the importance to have a holistic set of documentation to facilitate you to be able to estimate your ability to participate in the pilot, and then you understand the effort required for you to build, and also to facilitate your general planning, because of course there are other things you may need to invest into over the coming year. So, and it's actually also a question, when I recall the discussions we're having with the national central banks, this also was raised at national level already there by PSPs. So, as said, you will receive sufficient information during the call for expression of interest phase to estimate your development efforts and be able to apply. The first batch of documentation we published now in March, and by the feedback I've gotten here bilaterally or via certain associations has been quite positive and helping there. We'll publish further information in April. This includes as well technical specification, for example, regarding implementation, the APIs, and so forth. And however, one thing that's also important is, since this is a bit of an agile development, right? We are developing, you are developing, you give us feedback, right? Of course, the documentation has a certain framing, etc., but that will be updated continuously, also based on the learnings we have. So there will never be this one final set of documentation that never ever will change, but we will use this, and we'll try to publish all of this timely, as well as give you perspective of what to expect when, to facilitate your ability to plan and say, okay, well, look, if I get this set of specifications in January, then I need to have this right developer available then and can deploy them at this point in time. I don't need to make them available at an earlier point or later point. So this should also facilitate your overall planning there.
Thanks a lot, Sebastian. We have around 20 questions on this topic that keep receiving live, so I'll try to group some of them and prioritize the ones that we got first. Speaking about planning, you were closing. There's a question on flexibility. Will participating PSPs be able to join the pilot phase at a later stage?
So we have one call for expression of interest. I said 14th May deadline to apply by then, please, right? Because we need to plan, you need to plan, and for that purpose, it is important that you apply timely for the call for expression of interest, because there's just one of this and not multiple. So only the PSPs that apply for the call for expression of interest are eligible to be ultimately evaluated. And this is ultimately critical for us to meet the timeline we have outlined here with starting the operational phase in 27, also for all the PSPs that will be participating, will be testing and onboarding, etc., to be able to do this timely. So there's not a lot of leeway and say, well, we do multiple setups of this call for expression of interest, or late starters, early starters, etc. Of course, within the development, right? This is like, it's development, it's a pilot. We work this out together. So if there are some delays here and there, let's see how we can facilitate it within the build. But the start point is summer this year, and this is when we all want to start. So hence, please then submit the application by the 14th of May for it. Then we can assess your application, and then in the context of development, see where and how, which flexibility may be required, because ultimately technical development is not always straightforward. Also on our side, but we try to meet the timeline envisaged and outlined today.
Thanks a lot, Sebastian. Very clear. We definitely mark 14 May in our calendars. The next question is a bit on the legal side. And by the way, I forgot to say, I'd also like to invite Evelyn and Helen to chip in the answers at any point they feel like. Sebastian, the question is, what regulatory requirements will apply to PSPs participating in the Digital Euro pilot?
Okay. So, of course, the digital pilot takes place in the regulatory framework that's out there today for retail payments, right? And in that context, PSPs remain responsible for determining and applying their due diligence and compliance frameworks for all pilot-related activities in line with applicable EU regulatory requirements. However, in doing so, PSPs can, of course, take into account the exemptions that are provided in the framework. So, for example, I recall still from my past when in the private sector, there's always a risk-based approach you apply, right, in context, for example, of AML in the CFT framework, and that ideally in coordination with the respective NCAs. To recall again the scope of the pilot, right, the scope of the pilot is a selected number of PSPs, approximately 30, a handful of merchants, all of them contracting with one of the national central banks or the European Central Bank, and as well Eurosystem staff, all residing in the Euro area and working for one of the central banks. That's I think what I can say on that part.
Thanks, Sebastian. Now, quite a specific question on the documentation referencing the call for expression questionnaire. I'm going to read it out loud. It says, with reference to question 1.1 of the PSP call for expression of interest questionnaire, what is meant by direct or indirect connection to target? Does it refer to the possession of target accounts, or to the type of technological connection used to interface with ESMIG?
So, okay, that question refers, I think, to everything of how do we do liquidity management, what's this target setup, etc. So first of all, to be clear, this question is not an eligibility requirement, but a weighted evaluation criterion, right? And here we want to understand a bit the different setups on the target side, because there will be different setups as well going forward when the issue may be launched, right? And this is geared towards, we want to better understand what does your target setup look like today. And again, this is not an eligibility requirement, but a weighted evaluation criteria. On the specific question, so what I think I understand here, but then also please that person may resubmit this question if I'm not addressing this appropriately and rightly. But I think what you refer to here is on the one hand the case of possession, which means direct access, or the usage, which is indirect access of target accounts, so the dedicated cash accounts, and that you can also, I think, read up on our public target guidelines.
Can I maybe step in there just to further clarify the answer of Sebastian? So indirect or direct participation means indeed having a target account. So this is not how you access your target account, but this is whether you would have your own target account or that you have indirect access to a target account. So that is what is meant with the question.
Thanks to both. The next question goes a bit broader, connecting with the legislative timeline. And it reads, how does the ECB's revised pilot timeline account for potential delays in the legislative adoption of the Digital Euro regulation? And what contingency provisions are included in the call for expression of interest documentation?
Shall I take this one, Sebastian?
Can go ahead, yeah.
Yeah. So the pilot is not one-on-one connected to the legislative process, in the sense that we need to have the legislation in place in order to do the pilot. And that's also why we work with a beta digital euro. So the legislative process and the progress is very clearly connected to when we can do a first issuance. But for the pilot, actually, the two are disconnected. As you see, also for the pilot, we do a carve out of functionality. So this is not the full digital euro. So in that sense, we see no direct connection between the progress in the legislative process, between the pilot and the pilot and the legislative process. Of course, for the first issuance, there is a very clear connection between the two.
Thank you, Evelyn. And perhaps we have time for a couple more questions. Sebastian, could the ECB clarify the compensation model and whether it will already be incorporated into the service design from the outset, even if only symbolic fees are applied, in order to avoid future architectural changes?
Yes, thanks for the question, Georgina. So maybe also linking back what Evelyn alluded a bit on the previous question already to legislation. First, you say the ECB or the Eurosystem is ultimately not responsible for the compensation model for digital euro, and for the specific purpose of the pilot. It is not foreseen to apply any specific compensation model. Yes, I understand the question that there are certain things from architectural point that may be considered here. However, for the core feature testing that we want to achieve during the pilot, this we don't see as a necessary requirement. So ultimately, pilot participants will bear their own costs. So this means that pilots, PSPs should not charge fees to end users, be it merchants or consumers, for the provisioning of pilot payment services in the context of the pilot. And we will also have, while it's not yet public, but we'll have provisions on this as well in the PSP participation agreement, which we will publish over the course of May. Hence, just in short, no, there will be not a compensation model tested or executed in context of the pilot.
Thanks, Sebastian. And perhaps one last question before we move on to the next presentation. I see three of them that are very similar. Also, one of them was posted earlier to the chat, so I'll bring them together in one go. Does the ECB plan to include offline P2B use cases in the pilot, including the offline funding process, requiring additional technical specifications? And how many use cases are required to participate in the pilot? All 4, or is it possible to offer less?
Okay, so we have, maybe start with the last one, right? Because that's a slightly easier one. So we have 4 prioritized use cases. Evelyn outlined them at the beginning. This is the core of the pilot. This is what we want to test for the pilot. We want to have a very distinct scope here so that everyone knows what they're getting into. On the one hand, on the Eurosystem side, what we need to develop here, but on the other hand as well on the PSP side, be it the distributing or acquiring PSPs. And per their role, also per your role as an acquiring or distributing PSP, you're expected to support those use cases as part of the pilot scope. On the offline question, I think here we, of course, are preparing overall the P2B offline use case during the pilot, but we are not demonstrating it yet. So the development of the technical specification is something that we have ongoing here on our side, including the security requirements, and that is part of the timeline, but this is not tested in the pilot. However, I want to draw your attention to one thing, which I just recalled because we did a publication a couple of days ago, maybe it was even yesterday, not 100% sure, but we are running via the group a work stream called G5. This focuses on terminals and ATM providers, and that looks at the specifications in that space. And also, of course, offline plays a critical role here. So that's something, don't hesitate to apply for that if that is also something you have expertise in and interest in contributing.
Thanks a lot, Sebastian, and also to Evelyn. Let's now move on to the next presentation on business architecture, pilot payment services, user journeys, and minimum user experience requirements. Sebastian, back at you.
Yes, thank you, Georgina. So this slide now, but as well the respective documents, which we have tried to summarize in one slide, which is quite a substantial document. So let me try to capture this as detailed as possible for you now. Gives you a high-level view on the business architecture of the beta digital euro during the pilot. This outlines the services supported by pilot PSPs in the Eurosystem and the performance and reliability requirements for pilot PSPs. Since this document and the domains are structured around the main participants here, let me shortly recall them. We have the end users, so the consumers and merchants. They access the Euro service via mobile channels and apps for online and offline payments. We have the pilot PSPs. They manage and provide access to payment services, including, for example, funding and defunding. Then we have the third-party service providers, which may support pilot PSPs for their development efforts. And then, of course, the Eurosystem that provides the underlying infrastructure and tools to PSPs, like the DESP and for example, the software development kit. So not only, let's say, visually on the slide, but also practically, pilot PSPs are at the core of this architecture, right? So you directly engage with and intermediate between end users and the Eurosystem. You will enable the merchants with checkout solutions, both in E and M commerce, and also at the POS via the soft POS applications on, for example, a smart device, be it a smartphone, a tablet, etc. PSPs, you will provide access to pilot services to private individuals via mobile applications, as I just said. And this you can do either by leveraging our SDKs and integrate into your proprietary apps, but also use the Digital Euro app for that purpose. Another thing, I think was a question that came up last time, also was something that came up in the technical service provider workshop. Can the likes of a Vero, an MBWay, Bizum, Bankomat, etc., who have front-end services that can be provided to end users, participate in the pilot? Yes, they can participate in the pilot, supporting pilot PSPs as a contracting party. They are providing a front end and integrate the pilot Digital Euro applications next to other functionality. To then now facilitate the different use case, and coming back here to the PSPs, PSPs will need to develop certain functionality. This functionality is linked to access and liquidity management services. They're pretty much aligned for both online and offline payments. Then there is transaction management services for online payments, while for offline payments, we have the offline distribution service component, and that needs to be integrated. Maybe shortly a bit more of a deep dive on offline here, since this was a question that came up in, I think, questions up front here. It also was a topic that was raised in the technical service providers workshop we had in February. So the Eurosystem will provide quite some significant support to PSPs to integrate the offline solution via the offline SDK. And this includes, for example, libraries with source code, remote provisioning of the offline wallet to the secure element, including necessary security countermeasures, and, for example, thereby protect against double spending. We also provide documentation such as the API references and integration guide, an offline SDK, sample app, including some source code, and test scripts. And with that, we believe I think PSPs are very well equipped to support one of the most innovative features of the pilot. As said, the pilot PSPs are at the core of this, while of course the Eurosystem plays a critical role. Yeah? And the PSPs access the Eurosystem infrastructure, here the DESP, to which Evan also already alluded to earlier on, and that DESP provides you with a set of services like the access management, alias lookup, and of course the settlement services. PSPs will connect to do that via API calls to the respective access gateways. When we do that and we facilitate this, we stay true to what I think we have always said publicly, and I think Markus Hertel recently said something again on open standards this week at a conference. We use open standards to do this, right? And this is, for example, ISO 20022 for the data dictionary data model. We also use other sets there in regards to incorporating existing standards and adapting them to the use of APIs, as such as the Berlin Group Data Dictionary. And lastly, I think what's important to recall again in this document, we give you as well a view of the objectives we have around reliability and performance objectives. So reliability in terms of availability of the services that we provide to end users, but also, for example, latency objectives towards which we are looking. All of that services, they are this is a baseline for us to facilitate the payment services, user journeys, and related UX requirements at which we will be looking next. So on this slide again, tried to summarize for you, I think, 10th or more pages in one slide here, and we give you a bit of view on the pilot payment services and the related user journeys and minimum UX requirements. So the pilot payment services, Annex 1, and actually all of the documents that are listed here, they're all designed in one structure, right? So it should be easy to follow. It actually applies as well to the end-to-end flows that Helen will speak to in a bit. So it's all structured around access management, liquidity management, and transaction management. In the access management part, you get a view that is related to user relationship management with the Digital Euro. So onboarding. So which are all the steps a PSP customer must take to become a Digital Euro user? Account settings or configurations, like setting up the phone number as an alias to send or receive payments. And then, well, ultimately, maybe there's offboarding as well. So offboarding and unregistering from the Digital Euro services. Then liquidity services, liquidity management. These are all the services that relate to the user funds. So how are funds moved in and out into Digital Euro holdings, which is ultimately basically transferring money between the user's Digital Euro accounts and their private money accounts. And in that context, of course, as well, the reverse waterfall functionality, which offers the possibility to automatically use funds from or to the private money account when Digital Euro holdings are insufficient or the holding limit has been reached. And lastly, and that is, I think, the most visible ultimately, or the most present in day-to-day for the end users when provided to them, are transaction management. So these are all the services where payments are done and funds are transferred between Digital Euro users to merchants or between peers. Then to try to, let's say, put this better into context and provide a picture there, we have, in addition to the pilot payment services, published supporting documentation on user journeys and user experience requirements. The user journeys is ultimately a step-by-step description of how end users interact with Digital Euro services. To give you a concrete example, for the e-commerce payment via alias or DIN, the journey will describe all the steps the user needs to take from inserting his or her alias on the merchant checkout page, over the consent and authentication in their payment app, until the confirmation of the successful payment. Here we show the happy flows, so what happens from start till end if everything goes well. The user experience requirements, these are rules to which PSPs must comply, at least to some of them, when they implement the services to make sure the Digital Euro service can be used in a consistent way across different apps and interfaces. They are related to what a user must see, for example, or able to do when interacting with Digital Euro services. They are structured again in three ways. We have the generic requirements that are rules that apply across all user journeys. These are, for example, requirements on authentication, error handling, accessibility. again, give you a concrete example here. Users shall be able to cancel a payment before authentication starts, or end users shall be able to use authentication methods equivalent to those available for other means of payments. The generic requirements are running under what we call the equivalence principle. So we should aim, or you should aim there as well, that the digital euro service should be offered and treated in the same way as other payment services, and per that make it easy for the end user, but also make it easy for you, and reuse what you have implemented today. Then we have the specific requirements. There are rules that are directly linked to one of the services in our example. Would be then here on the e-commerce payment case I just outlined, a specific requirement that at the pay's checkout page shall present the beta digital euro at an equivalent level of other means of payments, or that only the first 4 and last 4 characters of the DIN shall be visible when the rest is masked when displaying a safe DIN in the pay's front-end solution. So these are rules, again, or requirements that are specific to given user journeys. Then, lastly, we have option requirements. So the name, it's optional. There's not a must to follow this. They are there to improve the user experience when people interact with the digital euro services. So there, for example, you could think of something like you request remembering the alias DIN to facilitate future payments on a given web page, yeah? Or pilot PSPs may avoid including error codes unless required for end user support. All of that, and then I'm about to close here as well. We provide very detailed wireframes as well, right? So you have a visualization of how user journeys and UX requirements can be implemented. And with that, I would close here and hand over back to Georgina, which I think goes again back into Q&A.
Thanks, Sebastian. Indeed, we have already received some questions on this area. So let's go through them one by one. The first one says, many technical service providers currently offer aggregator or hub-based services to groups of PSPs, enabling shared infrastructure and avoiding redundant bilateral integrations. Does the ECB envisage allowing authorized TSPs acting on behalf of participating PSPs to access DESP services to support these widely used operating models?
Okay, that's a long question. I try to capture most of it to the extent I can, and let me take firstly a step back. So I think the ECB, the Eurosystem, we recognize the key role of technical service providers and which role they play in retail payments today, right? You've seen it from publications last year. We have had our call for experts on this in February, and a meeting day workshop there. We published something on that this morning, actually. And here, I think, first of all, let me emphasize, we see them having a critical role. Maybe shortly on the workshops that we have run. So we have run 2 workshops in that regard to better understand of how, on the one hand, acquiring technical service providers as well as distributing technical service providers, so those who support PSPs in those 2 domains, are interested, are willing to support PSPs for the purpose of the digital euro pilot. There was strong support voiced there, I think, to do so. And also we focus on, okay, how can we help TSPs to play a role and prepare not only themselves, but also to support PSPs for the development, for the pilot and beyond. And we learned that, I think, a broad range of TSPs is interested to participate and to support, and they can do this across domains, right? I referred to earlier on a bit on the front end, but also, of course, on the back end, right? You have processors, you have connectivity providers, you have some who have very specific services linked to alias solutions, fraud and risk management, and so forth. So there are these providers in the market who are interested in supporting PSPs, and hence also here, well, just a call to PSPs, use them for the purpose of the pilot, because ultimately TSPs can only participate if you work with them, right? So they need a contract with you as a PSP, and they will then be able to support you in that development. And again, as I said earlier on, it's something we're it's ultimately not an evaluation criteria, but something we are looking into in the questionnaire as well, to see of how PSPs will be working with TSPs to better understand the ultimate setup.
Thank you, Sebastian. I see some questions on the offline use case. I will try to bundle them. What good PSPs need to develop for the offline use case? What could be provided by the ECB, and how would the overall mechanism work?
So I think, and maybe that the question came in before I outlined it on the slide, but I think we as the ECB, as the Eurosystem, we provide substantial support for the offline part, right? This is on the one hand, recognizing the need for that support, but also the innovative angle of that part, right? And in the section 1 of the business architecture document, you find all the supporting documentation on that, and things we may provide around software components for the offline solution. Also, how does it link to the different domains, be it on the end user, the PSP and Eurosystem side. And then we also explain how the integration is facilitated for PSP. So while I cannot write now from the top of my head, go through this full document, but I would invite you, take a look at the business architecture document. In the beginning, we give a high-level overview of this, and thereafter, then in section 2 and 3 of the document, we give you more details of how we support. And I outlined, I think, the support earlier on in detail. And yeah, but if there are additional questions, don't hesitate to reach out. It was a question as well in context of the technical service provider workshop. And please then get in touch again. We try to either clarify in another focus session or as well via the FAQs.
Thank you, Sebastian. And let me take a moment to thank participation, because only for this section we have more than 50 questions received. We are trying to cluster them a bit as we go. And let me, Sebastian, now ask you one on the software development kits, which is an important topic that is raising many questions. Which technologies are supported? How far will the software development kit support the technical implementations? For instance, will they support the message flow, error detection, processing, standard logging?
Okay, so what will the SDK do? So the SDK will support, first of all native technology stacks, so namely iOS and Android, and support then the related functionalities like QR code reading generation, biometric interaction, transaction initiation, and history, and so forth. However, what it will not do, because it's an SDK, so it's not the app itself, so it will not include any user interface or components in that regard, but is an enabler for the proprietary apps, for the apps of the PSPs to support them in that functionality. Also on the offline side that is provided.
And one other one, follow-up, Sebastian, on the software development kits. Will a software point of sale development kit be provided by the Eurosystem?
No, I think we alluded to it already during the last focus session, but emphasize this again, then the Eurosystem does not currently plan to provide PSPs with a soft POS development kit. We see this as being common practice to be provided today in the market. PSPs have that available either in-house or they leverage technical service providers to providing that. Each PSP in that context can reuse what they have there today, included in their existing applications, and adapt it to the specificities of their commercial environment. However, as said, on the distributing and consumer side, we will have an SDK for the consumer-facing application, but to that I just alluded. So in short, no, it's not planned to provide that.
Thank you, Sebastian. And one last question before we let you breathe. Do you envisage reverse waterfall for all the use cases?
Okay, so I said it earlier on, right? So we try to test core functionality important to the DigiEuro, while of course ultimately not linked to the legislation anyway, but that the reverse waterfall functionality is something that has been in the legislation from the first day, and is also core to our design, also to manage possibly holding limits and all of those features, right? Hence, it's something we, on the one hand, foresee for the pilot, but also as an important feature for the purpose when the DigiEuro may be issued. And so hence, yes, we will test the reverse waterfall as well as waterfall functionality. Maybe let me shortly recall what this is. So in a situation where, Georgina, I owe you 50 euros, I have 30 euros on my DigiEuro or Beta DigiEuro account here, and I need to send you those 50 still, and you're not sufficiently happy with 30. There will be an automated triggering that we call the reverse waterfall of adding those additional 20 euros to it, so that I can send you ultimately 50 euros. So this means that in case your holdings are below the amount you actually require for the payment, that is facilitated. And we facilitate this across all the use cases. So, because I think that was the question, do we do it for all use cases? Yes, for P2P, POS, and e-com, we will facilitate that, always in a situation when ultimately the amount that you need to pay is lower than your holdings you have at that moment.
Thank you, Sebastian, for all the useful explanations. I am now looking at Helen to tell us more on functional requirements and end-to-end process flows.
Thank you very much, Georgina. Now you have heard quite a bit already about the technical documentation that we publish, both the business architecture, user journeys, and UX requirements presented by Sebastian. And I will now have the pleasure of taking you one level deeper even on the technical elements of the pilot and presenting to you the functional requirements and end-to-end process flows documents, which define what pilot PSPs need to implement and how to operate this during the pilot. So in the documentation that we have published, you can see that these are two dedicated deliverables. However, they're strongly linked and are also referencing each other. The functional requirements define mostly the rules and capabilities to be implemented as a participating PSP, whereas the end-to-end flows then show how they are executed and in which sequential manner. It's important to, of course, highlight that these documents are building on the remainder of the design. So the architecture introduces already the actors and their roles. That then is, of course, also part of the functional requirements and end-to-end process flows. And the user journeys have been the foundation to develop those end-to-end process flows. So this to facilitate your understanding and to reiterate that these documents now allow us to move from a conceptual to a stage in where we are preparing for execution and facilitating you to have a clear understanding of what to build and how to operate it during the pilot. So the functional requirements, not so surprisingly, are defining the functional and operational model under which the pilot will operate and specify these pilot payment services that the PSPs must provide. Sebastian has already introduced them earlier. So we are speaking about those three major areas of the access management, the transaction management, and the liquidity management. So from a PSP perspective, I see those three main elements. It's the user and account model, how to indeed create a user, assign the dean, assign the alias. Sebastian was also mentioning this already. What are my core responsibilities and how can I conduct them? How do I authenticate? How is transaction handling foreseen, and so on? And then importantly, of course, also on the liquidity logic, the end-to-end flows and functional requirements detail how funding and defunding is foreseen. We've already had some questions on this also, including the waterfall mechanisms that are there to support this smooth transaction. So this document sets out the minimal functional scope and rules for every participant, and of course with the aim to ensure a consistent behavior across all the pilot PSPs, to have a smooth functioning, and especially, again, in mind with a unified and good user experience. The end-to-end flows translate then those user journeys into very explicit steps and how they are to be performed in a sequential manner. And again, between all included users, that would be, actors, so the end users and the PSPs and the Digital Euro Service Platform. So in an example of a payer-initiated transaction, it is very clearly stated how the payer PSP then would validate, in the example of Sebastian, his payment and is submitting it to the desk. Desk would then orchestrate the routing of this message, and upon the validation and confirmation of the payee, PSP ensure settlement and make sure that all end users involved are receiving a confirmation. So for potential pilot PSPs, the key value of the end-to-end process flows is to have some clarity on where responsibility is anchored, both in terms of the development and operation, how the interaction with the desk is structured. I think that is a very critical point to understand clearly, and how transactions can be handled seamlessly across all the involved actors. When you review these documents in light of your potential application, it would be good to look at them with a question of how would we implement those exactly within our existing setup and service model. An example here could also be the onboarding process that you already have in place. So how could then the requirements set out, the flows described, be included in those existing processes, and how can we align with them? What is important to mention here, I think, is that the documentation or design of the Digital Euro pilot is intended to be sufficiently flexible to accommodate for the various types of institutions that we have across the Eurozone and that we very much encourage to participate. So, and thereby we also hope, of course, that with your participation, and Sebastian mentioned this already, you can also then contribute to potential refinements in the design. To close this item, let me reiterate this importance as it is defining the blueprint of the Digital Euro that we are piloting within the next year to start. And it's an important document for you to internally assess and prepare for your application. And with this, I would hand back to Georgina to open the floors for any question.
Thanks a lot, Helen. Before we dive into the first question, I see in the questions we are receiving live that many of you are wondering where to find the documents on functional requirements and E2E process flows. And please let me clarify that you will find everything on the dedicated pilot section that we have on the ECB website. Everything is detailed there. Helen, now back to you. Let me pose you the first question, which is how far is a 24/7 support needed versus defined service hours, assuming that the user base is very limited?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, and an important one. Let me answer this by taking a step back first. So the idea of the Digital Euro is to provide a digital form of cash. And just like cash, it should be available 24/7 all days of the year. And this applies, of course, also to all the four prioritized use cases. That being said, the DESP, the Digital Euro Service Platform, is therefore also planned to be available 24/7, 365. During the pilot, indeed, due to the limited scope and number of participants, we are planning to have the service desk operating between 9 and 5 on every target working day.
Thank you, Helen. The next question we have seen repeated many times, which is the response performance requirement seems demanding. Are they an ambition or a requirement?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And indeed, I think we can say that about both the Digital Euro as a whole, but also about the Digital Euro pilot. It is indeed a very ambitious and strategic European project. And The requirements also regarding performance are not an exception here. Indeed, because it is a pilot, we are viewing these as an ambitious objectives. And this is, by the way, applying both to the participating PSPs, but also to the ECB. And then we very much value this opportunity to learn and also assess the feasibility of those requirements that are set out.
Thank you, Helen. Participants are also wondering whether any additional details on the PSP, DESP, PSP connectivity model or on the service provider itself can already be shared, or whether there's an indicative timeline for when further information may become available.
Thank you very much, Georgina. Indeed, we have published already quite a lot. However, we have not yet published the connectivity model that is foreseen for the Digital Euro pilot to facilitate the interactions between PSPs and the DESP. And this is something the project team still is finalizing to identify the right, efficient and secure solution, and will share soon, I hope, at the beginning of the development phase, of course.
Helen, there are now many questions on the Digital Euro dedicated cash account. Let me shoot you some of them. So first of all, will a Digital Euro dedicated cash account be set up as part of the Digital Euro pilot phase? And how would it be accessible?
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, liquidity is very important. So thanks for this question. Yes, the DESP DCA will be needed also in the pilot phase. And it might be a very no-brainer to say that no liquidity, no payment. So yes, we will need this DESP DCA, and it's also mentioned in the onboarding overview, on which I will speak a bit later. That indeed the PSPs need to set up a DESP DCA ahead of the pilot. I am already taken a bit now from also again the next item, that of course this is not only required for the start of the pilot, but of course also for testing purposes.
And Helen, will access be provided via a user to application mode through a dedicated graphic user interface? And will it be possible to execute liquidity transfers to the RTGS dedicated cash account or to the main cash account?
Yes, thank you. It's a very technical question, but allow me to say that the DESP DCA is foreseen as a dedicated cash account that is in the DESP. So the liquidity transfers that are foreseen would then happen from the participants, either a direct participant or indirect participant. Evelyn and Sebastian already alluded on this. So directly from this participant's MCA to the DESP DCA. We do not foresee any interaction between other DCAs within the perimeter of target. Now on the access, the access to this account would be happening via the direct integration between the DESP DCA and target. So for a user, they could, we would mostly foresee an A2A integration.
Thank you, Helen. And now moving on to the end-to-end process flow. How far the PSPs are allowed to change the overall message flows between the participating parties, and how far the PSP internal flows are examples and can be adapted?
Yes, thank you. Let me start by saying and reiterating probably that we are working in an extremely ambitious project, and we are now working towards the pilot that is supposed to be happening in a controlled environment with a clear stance on the participants, eligible participants, also on the end user side. And a very, let's say, contained period of time as well. And what does this mean? There was also a question on, can I join the pilot later? We think that this is, it's important to have a common outline on what we want to do and how we want to do it. So in principle, the answer to this question would be no, those flows cannot be adjusted, because the principal logical sequence of the messages that is depicted in the end-to-end flows must be adhered to at any times. Validation steps cannot be jumped over or missed. And very importantly, the pilot PSPs should not or cannot modify the interactions between them and DESP. That being said, and being very strict, of course, the, let's say, local adaptations in user experience, internal optimizations of the flows, or any, let's say, a technical consideration on the PSP side is allowed as long as it does not alter any of the functional requirements that are set out in the documents. So in principle, what is flexible is how the logic of the Digital Euro pilot is implemented on the PSP side, but the what and when of the steps and the principles is not.
Okay, very clear. And also related to the end-to-end process flows. In the NFC payment case, how will the pilot PSP acting as payer know if the authentication has already been properly performed in the user device before tapping?
Yeah, I'm trying to answer this one as good as I can. So the flows and use cases that we have foreseen are leaning very much upon, let's say, existing payment experiences, but also tools. So in the situation of a soft POS payment where I tap my phone, the authentication happens really within my device, within my phone. This could be biometrics, this could be a PIN code. So I need to unlock my phone to pay with the means of payment that I choose on my phone, and then I tap. So the authentication is actually happening on the user side already before this payment is confirmed by the user.
Thank you, Helen. And perhaps one last question before we move on to the next presentation. In the P2B soft POS use case, will a canonical CPACE-based EMV flow be followed? How will the payment instrument be provisioned into the Digital Euro app, and who is responsible for provisioning?
Yes, thank you very much. So indeed, I think I can continue a bit on the previous response, that we are reusing existing standards and technologies to the degree possible. So yes, the pilot does require a CPACE-based soft POS implementation, and this would be under the responsibility then of the acquiring pilot PSPs to provision such a solution that is compliant with the existing standards here. Sebastian was alluding a bit in his first presentation on the different types of PSPs that could be participating in the pilot, and this requirement would then only be pertaining to the acquiring PSPs and not necessarily the distributing PSPs.
Thank you, Ellen. And stay with us, because it's time to move to the last presentation of the day on onboarding and user testing.
Yes, thank you very much. And indeed, the final item of today, Sebastian has earlier introduced the timeline for the pilot, and now we are taking a deep dive on an element of the timeline that pertains to the onboarding and user testing. The emphasis is really on the key steps that are required to ensure readiness for the pilot. This is also this very pink element of the slide. Readiness for the pilot is at the core of this presentation. Onboarding here supports both the readiness for the user testing, but also for the start of the operational phase of the pilot. So what you might have noticed when consulting the documentation is that you can see that we consider the development phase of the Digital Euro pilot to start already right after the selection of the participating PSPs. And that means also, of course, that there's a lot of activities that are foregoing in this phase, including also the onboarding to the DESP. This is reflecting a very ambitious timeline, and this is also needed to ensure the readiness for the pilot. So what do we mean by onboarding? We are presenting these steps to ensure that all participants are both technically connected and operationally configured. And this is then materializing in those two main elements of the onboarding overview, which is on the one hand side, the setup of the reference data and establishing the connectivity to DESP by the PSPs. What is very important here is that these steps must both be completed for both the user testing environment and the production environment individually. And without the successful onboarding, as I also just mentioned before, it is not possible to access DESP and therefore neither possible to participate in the user testing, which then would be impossible to start of the pilot. So this is why we're putting a lot of emphasis on this already now. So, as I already said, upon the successful onboarding to the user testing, environment, the using testing activities can start. And here we have a very clear focus on allowing PSPs to test the functioning of the 4 prioritized use cases. So we are planning to conduct this in a very structured approach and again, controlled environment where the participating PSP has the possibility to, first of all, validate what they have developed on their side on all pilot payment services. So both when it comes to liquidity, to onboarding and all other kinds of services, to see how they work when they connect to the DESP. So it's a validation of the functionality. It's also the interaction between the PSP and the DESP that is tested. And thereby, and coming back to my previous point, we also confirm, of course, the ability to execute all pilot end-to-end process flows. This is also why, according to the plan, and this was already hinted at, the user testing period will conclude for the pilot with end-to-end testing across actors and with a formal backend integration validation. So both these items are considered to be technical readiness activities, but are really to be viewed as enablers for achieving the operational readiness. So when you look at these documents from your internal perspective, again, I would invite you to look at them with the angle of how can we support this in our current setup. Sebastian was already mentioning other projects, resource considerations. Do we have the right people in place to ensure that we are able to onboard to the DESP as set out in this timeline? And are we able to participate in the user testing period actively? Because it is, of course, necessary to say that the successful user testing is then a prerequisite for the participant to be activated in the production environment and start the operations of the pilot. Yes. So in summary, it's a structured pathway for you to assess your ability to contribute with your own readiness for the pilot. Onboarding and user testings are key enablers, and I also really view them as linking the development on PSP side that happens maybe in a more isolated manner to the DESP, and then ultimately the start of the operational phase of the pilot. And with this, I will hand over to you, Georgina.
Thanks a lot, Helen. Again, many questions, so let's dive straight into it. First one is, if a PSP does not actively participate or fails in the testing, is it possible for the ECB to exclude it from the pilot?
Yeah, thanks for this question. And let me start by saying that we are, as Sebastian said, we are already receiving applications from PSPs, and I can only speak for myself, but we are very excited to make this pilot happen. And therefore, we also, of course, expect all to be actively engaged in the months and the activities that lie ahead of us. Yes, indeed, we also expect you to actively participate and also adhere to the outlined timelines. But as Sebastian already hinted at earlier, I believe, in one of his answers, is that we are, because this also is a small and controlled environment, very eager to engage directly with PSPs where problems should arise, either from a technical, from a development, from a testing or onboarding angle. We really want to be there to support, to make this happen. So while, of course, as I also said, the completion of the user testing is a prerequisite to for the activation in the operational phase of the pilot, I think we will do whatever we can to avoid the need to exclude anyone.
Does this mean, Helen, that PSPs will have to follow a specific test plan?
Yes, indeed. There will a detailed onboarding and testing plan is under preparation and will be shared with the selected PSPs. And there we are, of course, expecting the participants to follow closely and adhere to all outlined timelines, intervals, and steps. Again, here, I think maybe it can be viewed like an end-to-end process flows. There are a lot of dependencies and relationships between those activities. So indeed, they might be dependent on each other, and therefore there will be a plan that very clearly states by when do we at the latest need to have functionality X in place in order to proceed to the next step. And this will be a very structured process. And let me also here refer to, again, this is actually indeed one of the reasons why you already received the onboarding overview. It is to make sure that once you see the timeline, no one thinks, yeah, second half of 27, that's a long time from now. What we are intending to already provide with this onboarding overview is to make everyone aware that if the pilot shall start, and it does, in the second half of 2027, then we already have a lot of steps that we need to prepare on our side. We fully acknowledge the development efforts on the PSP side, but then the direct engagement with the ECB, with DESP, be it in both the context of the connectivity, the reference data, or the testing, is happening already rather soon. So yes, in short, we will provide in a more detailed plan and would need PSPs to commit to this.
And how will the ECB assist if PSPs face any issues during development or user testing phase?
Yes, so maybe just to say again, as I also mentioned in my presentation, the user testing phase, the onboarding phase, are part of the development phase. So we have a development phase where we that essentially lasts until very shortly before the operation of the pilot. Why is that important? Because it also gives some sort of flexibility. Now I outlined that there will be a plan with, yes, details and deadlines, but of course there will also be intervals. If something doesn't work, if an issue arises, then we are there to support you in fixing this issue, so we still can then embark on the next step. So this is the, let's say, a more principal idea of the support that PSPs, of course, and together with their allocated NCBs, will receive during the development phase of the pilot. And of course, I would also like to stress here that we do not envisage this support to stop once the development phase is ended fully. The feedback framework was already mentioned, so this would be an opportunity to provide ongoing feedback on the product, on the documents that we publish. But of course, from a more technical perspective here, if during user testing an incident evolves, then there will be a very structured process on how to report this incident, which documentation to provide to support the solution finding, and there will be a dedicated service desk for this at the ECB to ensure that the PSPs are fully equipped to engage and continue their efforts.
I think with that, Helen, you just answered one of our next questions, which was whether PSPs would receive operational support during the pilot, right?
Yes, indeed.
Then let me go to the next one, which is how far is the test scope purely functional versus non-functional tests? Are penetration security tests other areas potentially to be considered?
Yeah, thanks for this question. Indeed, testing is many things and has very many important aspects. So the user testing period that is also outlined in the pilot timeline and the onboarding overview is the time in which we invite the PSPs to connect their backend to the DESP and validate the functionality of the 4 selected use cases. With that, I implicitly said the focus is on the functional testing to validate between PSPs and the DESP. That being said, we are already conducting other tests the moment we start the onboarding of the users. So this is the preparation and ensuring that these functionalities are available. Here we are already preparing for this readiness and testing thereby. We will again also publish or share with the selected PSPs a more detailed testing plan that outlines really all the elements that are necessary to test, and where we invite PSPs to prepare for. I think again with the mindset on that we had also from these pilot payments and services, PSPs would then also be able to structure their test within this testing plan. For instance, if they would wish to retest certain elements after fixing any bug, for instance, within liquidity management or access management, maybe during the user testing period you would like to test whether or not you can increase the user experience by slightly changing the process, then this is what you can do. And the plan will both outline very clearly on the deadlines, but still also give some flexibility for PSPs to conduct their testing on their side according to their, as we fully acknowledge, individual and institutional needs.
Thank you, Helen. Let's see if we can try to squeeze in 2 more questions to close. What methodology is being used for user testing across different demographic groups, and how will behavioral insights be incorporated to address adoption barriers identified during the pilot?
Thank you. It's a very important question because, of course, the digital euro is for all, and we must ensure also during this pilot that this is indeed the case. Let me start by saying that, as I just outlined in my previous question, the user testing period that is foreseen for the digital euro is primarily about the integration between the PSPs as actors and the DESP as actors. Of course, indeed, we will also conduct end-to-end testing, which then would include the end users. However, I would see that the real value of the pilot, the operational phase of the pilot, also lies there in the direct engagement with the users. And again, there with reference to the feedback framework that we also published, provide a good opportunity to provide feedback on the experience also that was received from the users and how the product can be further enhanced based on these feedbacks.
Thank you so much, Helen. I am afraid time is up and we need to close it here. Thanks a lot for your attendance, participation, constructive engagement during the event. As anticipated, unfortunately, we didn't have time to answer all questions, but we will make sure to update our FAQ section on the website accordingly. You will also find there a link to submit questions about the documentation for the pilot, and we will get back to you. I take this opportunity to also invite you to reach out should you need further information and submit your application before the deadline on 14 May. Before we close, Evelyn, last words?
Thank you, Georgina, and thank you to everybody that participated. Thank you for the very precise and very good questions, which will, we hope that we have been able to answer, providing clarity to you and also others that were listening in. Just let me close by saying that as was also, I think, reflected by both Helen and Sebastian, we believe that the pilot is a very important step to advance the digital euro. It will allow us to learn. And if I say us, it's the full ecosystem, first on a smaller scale. And of course, after that, we will need to scale up. But this is a very important first step. So we hope that you are equally excited as we are. We hope that the information that we have provided will really support you in taking the decision to join the pilot. As said before, it is a very good experience, I think, from both sides, because it will allow you to get first-hand experience, but also to really deliver the input on learnings so that we can further improve. There will be support on the technical development and the operational phase, as was explained. And together, we will really shape the next generation of digital payments in Europe. So let me move to the more factual things. So in the second half of April, we plan to publish the PSP participation agreement and its appendices. So that is still to come. And then the application deadline is on the 14th of May. So please adhere to this date because we cannot accept applications after this date. And then, as has been said and explained by Georgina before she closed, is we have the FAQ, which we will maintain and update. So also questions that we got here, we were not able to answer, we will add to the FAQ. And there's a dedicated channel for submitting new questions. With that, I would like to close. If we go to the next slide, we have some housekeeping things. So here you see the links to the FAQ. and where you can also submit questions. But what is also important is give us feedback, because it will allow us to, maybe improve, but also to understand what are the needs for potential further information sessions. So again, thank you very much for joining us. We hope it has been very helpful, and we're really looking forward to cooperate together to have a successful Digital Euro pilot in the second half of next year. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the day and the weekend, and let's stay connected. Thank you.